you need a certain amount of calories because it requires energy to do that.
Yep.
So if you have a resting metabolic rate of 2000 and you decide to eat 1600 calories a day for 4 months, the body is either going to die or it has to adapt to the lack of energy coming in, lack of fuel that you're giving it.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am super excited to have my friend on the line. I actually just about a week and a half ago, we got to spend a weekend together at sort of a biohacking / men's retreat. And some of the things that he was telling me about health and some of the things that he teaches to his followers were really unique, really things I had not heard about before, and also very kind of contrary to a lot of popular belief. But the results are incredible for both himself and his clients. His name is Justin Nault. He's a certified nutritional therapist. He's a specialist in sports nutrition, a specialist in fitness nutrition. He's an amazing guy. We were talking about relationships and all sorts of other amazing kind of topics that he really, really impressed me on. So I'm really excited to get into this episode. Real quick, before we get started, if you are a repeat listener, we would greatly appreciate if you could leave us a review, subscribe. If you find value in this episode, which I'm sure you will, please share it with as many people as possible. And with that, Justin, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm super excited.
Awesome, man. Well, let's give people, I know we got a lot of really awesome and very interesting topics that actually we haven't really talked much about with other guests on this podcast. But first, why don't we give people a little background about you, how you got into health and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. For me, I think like a lot of people, it probably started with vanity to some degree, right? Like when I was a kid, I was really young, probably like 12 or 13. And I found like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and Sylvester Stallone. And I got this like idea of masculinity, but I was a chubby kid. I was like real chubby growing up. And I was always like super insecure about that. I would like skip school field trips if I thought I had to go swimming or something like that. I was just like really had like a lot of shame around my body. So now I was 15, I started lifting weights like really heavily, like an hour a day, every day. I was running on a treadmill and just like trying to get my body fat down and trying to do this kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger-esque thing, but still just, from a very young age, I just really hated my body, which I think helps me in my work now because most of the people I end up working with have been in the same shoes of just like really hating their body from a young age. So anyway, it just was like mostly vanity for me and trying to get this body that I wanted. And then I became a professional musician is what I chose for my career. So I went to music school, I moved out to Nashville, and I ended up playing like, between 250 to 300 shows a year for most of my career. I had a 15-year music career. I did reality TV. I had a YouTube channel, all this stuff. So all of my like body dysmorphia from when I was a young kid, in my mind, I was always the chubby kid, no matter what I saw, it didn't matter. I had full 6-pack abs and I was like the chubby kid in the mirror, right? So I was like really struggling with body dysmorphia, and the music industry just kind of made that worse because there was so much scrutiny on my appearance and I just cared about it so much. So it was the traditional stuff. I was like, training 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. I've done powerlifting and CrossFit and kettlebell certifications and normal traditional bodybuilding. I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. I was a boxer in college. I did like every possible fitness thing you could think of. And I never got the results I wanted body composition wise. So I started digging into nutrition probably around like 26, 27 years old, something like that. And I found the paleo diet and I got introduced to Rob Wolf and I met Abel James and all these guys. And I started like seriously digging into nutrition as kind of a hobby. And I actually became a certified nutritional therapist just because I was obsessed with the topic. The further I started to dig in, the more I wanted to learn about it. And right around that same time, just crazy universe stuff, my brother's daughter, Savannah, was born. And Savannah was born having over 300 seizures a day from the day she was born. So she was considered terminally ill. She was given less than 3 years to live, like 3 years maximum life expectancy. So we all ended up in the pediatric ICU for the first several months of her life. And she was having these seizures. And I learned about the Charlie Foundation, which is an organization that specializes in the ketogenic diet for the management of epileptic seizures in toddlers and infants and children. So I was like, this is crazy. So I started talking to these neurologists about it and learning that's really what the ketogenic diet is. That's what it comes from, is handling seizures in children, right? I was like, this is crazy. So Savannah ended up on a feeding tube. They actually drill a hole in her stomach and they call it a G tube. She couldn't eat or drink. And then they feed this baby formula to these children having seizures. And this is across the board. Like the whole US is doing this. This is like subsidized by our tax dollars. So they like put them on a ketogenic diet, but they're babies. So all they need to do is have something that's high fat, low carb, and mainstream medicine doesn't care at all about ingredient qualities. So they feed them this formula called Keto-Cal. And I happened to look at the ingredients on Keto-Cal, and dude, like the first several ingredients are all hydrogenated vegetable oils. It's like canola oil, sunflower oil, high oleic sunflower oil, so they can pretend it's healthy, and then artificial sweeteners. And I was like, this doesn't even touch taste buds. It's going in it's designed for a G tube. Why are you putting artificial sweeteners in here, right? So I asked the neurologist to look at the ingredients, and I watched him. He looked at the ingredients, he read it, and he goes, huh, I never thought to check that.
Wow.
And that was it for me, man. It was like the ultimate, like, it was like I took the red pill in the Matrix, like the world collapsed around me. And I was like, this is a Vanderbilt neurologist. Like, this is one of the top hospitals in the world. And this guy just said this to me about an infant. This child is like 6 weeks old at this point, you know?
Yeah.
And it completely broke my brain. So I reached back out to Rob Wolf, and he recommended a bunch of like biochemistry textbooks. He was like, listen, man, like stop reading everyone's books. Stop reading, Mark's book and Dave's book and Ben's book, and stop reading these books, and like go study biology and biochemistry and really dig into this stuff. So long story short, the first product I ever created online was a spin-off. It was called the Perfect Paleo Powder. That was the first product I ever did in e-commerce. But that was actually basically based on a formula that I created for Savannah. So when this doctor, we talked about Keto-Cal, I went home and I bought food dehydrators, food processors, and I just tweaked and used NutriBullets and all this stuff. And I actually made this formula out of paleo-friendly superfoods, presented it to the neurologist, and we actually got the green light for us to feed this formula I created to my niece through her feeding tube. And that was really where Clovis came from. I just became like completely obsessed with learning about the human body.
Amazing, man. Wow. So yeah, wow. So then how did that turn out with Savannah?
Yeah, so Savannah's an interesting case. I mean, like her life expectancy, again, was less than 3 years. So she's already defied all odds. She's 7 years old right now. I've talked about it so much, and me and my family are used to it. But like when I talk to other people about it, it usually gets very emotional because she's considered 100% disabled. So she's still like, she can't sit up. She still eats through the feeding tube. She requires 24/7 care. There's like a nurse that actually lives in their house for most, I think 50 hours a week. That nurse is basically like living in the house, spend some nights there if she has to. So she requires 24/7 care, but she has dramatically beat her life expectancy according to the experts.
Yeah. So you created this formula originally for Savannah, and then you started offering it, I guess, kind of in a niche way to the paleo community, and you called it, and you call your community is called the Clovis community, right? Explain a little bit about that name and about the powder as well.
Yeah. Actually, I owe the name to my dad. I was trying to come up with a name for this company, and I wanted to sell this protein powder. So I tweaked the formula and basically made it like a collagen protein powder, which actually became the first ever certified paleo-friendly protein powder in the world at the time. And I just started bringing it to CrossFit gyms, and like CrossFitters started using this protein powder, so that was really cool. But ultimately it was damn, I totally just lost my.
So Clovis, the name.
Clovis.
And what else is in the powder too? Tell us, I'm curious.
Yeah, sure. So we can talk about the powder and Clovis. Yeah, I owe my dad for the name Clovis. I was trying to come up with a name for this company, and he's like, man, I was looking into the Paleolithic era, and there was this group called the Clovis Culture, and the Clovis Culture was basically the first known hunter-gatherer tribe in the North Americas during the Paleolithic era. And they were like hunting woolly mammoths with these spears. They created like these Adelaide things. They're like throwing spears at big game. And I thought it was super cool. So we named the company Clovis. But ultimately, I made what is now the Perfect Paleo Powder, later became what is now known as the Daily Superfood Powder, which is like the flagship product of Clovis. A lot of people put it in their coffee in the morning, but it's a chocolate flavored protein powder. It has collagen protein, it has glutamine, it has MCT oil, it has turmeric, it has 6 billion CFU probiotics. It has 100% of your vitamin C, it has 167% of your vitamin B12. So I basically tried to make like an all-in-one protein powder plus micronutrients, if that makes sense.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to actually get into some of the things, because you mentioned keto, but actually a lot of your thoughts and views and what you teach these days is not just keto, right? You actually interesting concept we should jump into as well is, you've talked about helping people actually lose weight by eating more, right?
Yeah.
Which is completely counterintuitive, and all the calorie counters will probably go crazy when they hear this, but there's some interesting thoughts behind it. Talk a little bit about that, and what you've talked to me about, which is metabolic rate, and increasing your metabolic rate and having a better resting metabolic rate, which I personally haven't heard too many people talk about, and it was kind of new when I heard you talk about it. So that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. I hadn't really heard much about it either. I knew that there was something called metabolic adaptation as I started to dig into people like losing weight through calorie cutting. Like there's a really famous study called the Biggest Loser study that talks about a lot of these contestants from that TV show gaining all the weight back and the metabolic dysfunction that followed from that extreme dieting and exercise. So I knew that, like, well, if you just dramatically cut calories, and if we speak to the term resting metabolic rate, this is the amount of calories you burn at rest in a 24-hour period if you were to lay on a couch with your eyes closed and do nothing. So you can go get this tested as a lab. They put a little machine on you that measures like oxygen and CO2, and they'll tell you how many calories you burn at rest. That's your resting metabolic rate. So basically, for your blood to pump, your heart to pump, your lungs to expand and contract, your brain function, you need a certain amount of calories because it requires energy to do that.
Yep.
So if you have a resting metabolic rate of 2,000 and you decide to eat 1,600 calories a day for 4 months, the body is either going to die or it has to adapt to the lack of energy coming in, the lack of fuel that you're giving it. So what it starts to do is shut down specific organ functions. The first thing to go is always fertility, right? So if your body thinks that there's scarcity in the environment, it doesn't want to bring another life into that environment, right? So what ends up happening is people trying to cut calories constantly to lose weight, they have to cut lower and lower and lower, and their health starts to fall apart. So this is where I started looking into energy production, like actual cellular energy. Usually it's measured in ATP. ATP is a carrier molecule for like the energy in our body, which then gets converted to ADP. And this is how we blink and walk and talk and do all the things we need to do. We need energy for that. So I started looking into energy creation in the body. And I realized that this entire concept of energy balance, as we're taught it, which is usually calories in, calories out, is fundamentally flawed from the jump. Because calories, if we measure the amount of calories in something, that's the amount of potential energy in that specific food item. Or it could be a non-specific food item, right? Like I've used the example of a credit card before, right? If I hold this credit card here, there's a certain number of potential energy inside that credit card, a certain number of calories. Everything has a caloric content. It's just that we don't have the metabolic machinery to convert that into energy, right? So I started realizing that calories in, calories out is not energy balance. What we're actually talking about is fuel versus energy. The food that we're putting in our body is fuel, but fuel is useless unless it is converted into energy. So I use the example of a car with no spark plugs, right? If you fill up a car with gasoline and that car, the engine has no spark plugs, you can step on the accelerator all day long. The car's not going to go anywhere. Doesn't matter how much fuel you put in the tank, that fuel can't be converted into energy. So what I started to realize is that most obese people and people living with chronic diseases are living in a chronically low energy state. And I started finding all this energy, like one example, all of this evidence for it. Like one example I can give you is testing depressed subjects. Depressed subjects in clinical studies have sometimes 20% less ATP than non-depressed subjects. So I was like, wait, depression and anxiety could literally just be low energy states. And then I started realizing that micronutrient deficiencies are the equivalent of having no spark plugs in the engine. So you have people who are taking in food, but they can't convert that food to energy. So they keep storing body fat. And this is how you end up with people claiming like, hey, I'm eating 1,100 calories a day and I'm still not losing any weight and I'm still storing body fat. And the answer from the mainstream is to basically gaslight those people and tell them that they're either lying about what they're eating or they don't know how to track calories or whatever. And it gets really messy because they're being told that energy balance is calories in, calories out, but it's just kind of a misunderstanding of what's happening on an energetic level.
Yeah, so like that's really interesting. The Biggest Loser study. What did they find? Those people, I know a lot of them gained the weight back and they had issues. You're saying they kind of ruined their metabolic rate there. And so what exactly did they find? Because that's an extreme case of like extreme calorie cutting, exercising really hard while extreme calorie cutting. And it actually, obviously it worked. They lost a lot of weight at first, right? But what happened after?
Yeah, so most of the clients gain back all of the weight. And there was some controversy around this study because they followed these contestants for 6 years. So they were measuring their blood markers and stuff all throughout the show, at the end of the show, and then followed them for 6 years after. So a lot of these people lost over 100 pounds. It's worth noting that like The Biggest Loser was basically us watching people get tortured on live TV. I mean, they were like just being starved. They're getting put through brutal workouts. Like nobody should lose weight this way. And then those people would have ended, excess skin. They'd need plastic surgery after that to have a normal looking body. Like it's just not a healthy way to go about it. So it's a very extreme example. But they showed, and like Harvard Medical did a whole write-up about this, The Biggest Loser study, where they said that by the last weigh-in, those people's leptin levels, which is basically the hormone that signals that you are full, like their leptin levels were completely destroyed. Their metabolic rate was very, very, very low. So they had this low metabolic rate and a lot of hormonal imbalances. They followed them 6 years later, and what they found was the people that had lost the most weight, those hormonal imbalances and that low metabolic rate never recovered. 6 years later, had not recovered. And this was like, I think the entire taping of the show was 11 weeks, right? So they did like extreme dieting for 11 weeks. People come to me today, like new clients that have been dieting and exercising for 30 years and they're still obese. And then we go get their resting metabolic rate done. And it's like, they're coming in 30% low than what their RMR should be. And they just can't lose weight. So the only option you have left is like, you can't just keep starving these people. You can't put them on a 600 calorie a day diet. Like literally their bodies won't function. Right. So what you have to do is fix the cellular mechanisms. So the cellular machinery, again, like replacing the spark plugs, we need to bring their bodies back to life and make sure that they can actually create energy from the food that they're taking in. So what happened in The Biggest Loser study is their resting metabolic rate absolutely plummeted. They had all these hormonal imbalances. So at some point, they either had to keep the extreme dieting and low calories going, but the moment they try to go back to a normal diet or exercise a little bit less, they start to gain body fat because now all of a sudden their body has slowed everything down. Hey, we only burn 900 calories a day now. This is all we can afford because this guy keeps starving us, right? Yeah. So then you go back to eating 1,500 calories a day, which is literally still a starvation diet. We can actually talk about a study on starvation that was wild. But then they start to gain excess body fat and they end up gaining all that weight back. And there were some people that stepped in. I made a video about this online and people were like, well, not all the contestants gained the weight back. Some of those contestants didn't gain the weight back because they got surgery done to keep the weight off.
Wow.
Or they supplemented things like hormone replacement therapy and things like that. So they had to go to extreme measures to try to keep that weight off.
Yeah. Right. So what's the right way to do this then? So someone comes to you, they have a low resting metabolic rate, which means they're not burning enough calories just naturally. What's the right way to do this?
Yeah, the right way to do it is probably the simplest way to look at this is food is only good for you, right? Food is never bad for you. Poison is only bad for you and is never good for you.
Yep.
So I'll give people helpful analogies. Like if we really just separate this to food versus poison, you can load essentially as much food as you want into your system and only good things are going to happen, assuming there is no poison also being thrown into the mix. So most people know that, a chicken breast is food, and most people know that a Pop-Tart is not really food, right? It's categorized as food in American society, but it's full of toxic ingredients, full of seed oils and artificial flavors and colorings and dyes that all have clinical data behind them showing that they're toxic to human health, even in small amounts, right? So most people's diets, like 70% of the standard American diet right now is one, it's like usually processed grains, but ultimately those processed grains are coming from junk foods. So people's diets are just riddled with these toxic ingredients that actually break cellular function. So your cells, for your cells to be able to take substrate, any kind of food, and turn that into energy requires cofactor and enzyme activity. Cofactor and enzyme activity rely on micronutrients. These are like your B vitamins, the water-soluble vitamins like your B vitamins and vitamin C, fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. So the whole reason that we eat macronutrients, fat, carbs, and protein, is to get those micronutrients that help our cells work correctly. But if we don't give our cells what they need to be able to create energy, then the food we eat is going to end up stored. That's basically the quick and easy way to look at it. So there's an analogy I use called the metabolic furnace that kind of helps people understand this. So if you have a furnace and that furnace has some flames that are burning 24/7, just these tiny little flames that are like always there, right? Well, if you take a bunch of logs and throw them on that metabolic furnace, dry logs that are super high quality and ready to be burned, then you're going to get really big flames And this furnace is going to be doing its job very well. The job of the furnace is to create energy in the form of heat. So if you give it a bunch of high quality fuel, the flames are going to burn bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's going to create more and more energy. That furnace is going to get hotter and hotter.
Yep.
But if you then decide that you're going to, instead of using logs, you're going to throw twigs or hay in the fire, little tiny twigs, it's going to burn up really quick. It's not going to create much energy. And then on top of that, every time you throw twigs into the fire, you spray it with just a little bit of fire extinguisher fluid. So this is the equivalent of like the sticks are a low calorie diet, and the fire extinguisher chemical are things like seed oils and all these toxic ingredients that are in our modern food environment. So you end up with this metabolic furnace that literally can't burn the fuel that you're giving to it, and therefore it can't create energy. So you end up in a situation where people are depressed, they're dealing with anxiety. And some of the top symptoms I see are like women that feel cold all the time. Their teeth are super sensitive. Their nails are brittle and breaking. They're pale. They bruise easily. Their hair is thinning. They no libido. They sleep 10 hours and they feel exhausted. Like if you really think about what's happening here, when we look at all those symptoms, that once we use the term low energy state, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like all these people are suffering from low energy. This is an energy problem.
Yep.
But we tell them the problem is that they're consuming too much energy, calorie, right? This is a broken system, man.
Yeah.
And then we also tell them to fear food, because we say, well, you know, if you eat too many calories, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter if it's grass-fed beef and organic fruit with no pesticides and wild-caught fish and shellfish and oysters and sweet potatoes. We tell them, doesn't matter if it's that high quality food, you're still going to get fat if you eat too much of it. So people are terrified of they think that food makes them fat.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really good distinction. I'm really glad I think a lot. I think very, very along the same lines as you. And food versus poison is something I've said a lot to people as well. Like I literally like, I remember I was in a group and we were sitting around a table and like literally, and these are like really successful business people. And I'm like in this kind of boardroom with them, imagine. And literally like more than half the room had like a Coke Zero or diet soda, like in front of them. And I'm like, you know, and someone asked me about it or something like that. And I said, well, to me, it's poison. Like I literally, when I look at that can, I literally see like a skull and crossbones, like poison, like on the can. Like that's how I look at it. It's poison. And I'm like, you know, bread. Why? Someone was saying to me yesterday, yeah, my father finally got hooked up on a CGM and he ate his morning bread and like it spiked through the roof. And I'm like, yeah, now he can, at least he has the data. Now he can see, but like, why? Like, bread is like an average food that like causes inflammation, like, you know, like causes, you know, gluten, leaky gut, like all sorts of blood sugar spikes, like just, and so again, it's like poison. Like for me, bread is poison. For me, you know, processed sugar, processed foods, you know, to simplify it, I do like, I never like to be categorized as paleo or whatever you call it, but it's like this, sometimes the quickest answer to just give people is like, hey, if you go paleo, at least you're eliminating, you know, processed foods, processed sugars, and eliminating a lot of the poison. There's still things you can do to be healthier within paleo, or, you know, if you want to be, you know, paleo / something else, whatever, that's fine. But eliminating the poison, I think, is so key. And for me too, like I literally eat as much as I want. Like if I'm hungry, I eat. I don't starve myself. I just eat, you know, great natural foods. And I never, like, I don't gain weight because I'm not on a diet. This is a way of life. That's another kind of distinguished, you know, thing that I like to distinguish there is like, don't diet. This has to be a way of life. What is something you could do for the rest of your life? So I think this is really powerful what you're saying. Any other, and I know you also, like in terms of poison, what are some of the things that you would consider? You talked about some of them, seed oils, but like, let's go down the list of like poison versus good stuff.
Yeah, this is where it gets crazy, right? And this is where a lot of like the bickering ends up happening online, because we can get into like seed oils are the biggest one, where I think seed oils are the most toxic thing in our modern environment right now.
Right. So fried foods, if you're eating fried foods, are probably fried with seed oils, right? So yeah,
for sure. Yeah, the biggest thing I tell people is like, if you want to eat oils, then try to make the distinction between seed oils and fruit oils. So like olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, in a perfect world, those oils should be being extracted from the fruit itself, not from the seed of the fruit, right? if you look at something like sunflower oil or canola oil, which is technically called rapeseed oil, like these are seeds, these things don't contain oil. The processing that goes into them, there's actually you can go on YouTube and search for how it's made canola oil and watch, get a visual representation of the process of this being made. You will never eat it again. It's the most insane thing you've ever seen. They're using hexane and chemical solvents, and it smells so horrible that they would never be able to sell it to anybody. So they have to bleach it and deodorize it and do all this crazy stuff. And then they put it in a plastic bottle and they sell it to you. It's crazy, you know?
Wow.
So ultimately, I would say that that's probably issue number one, is the seed oils. But then where a lot of things get tricky online is like, I'm also not I don't eat any raw vegetables with the exception of carrots. Like I love carrots, but carrots is technically like a root vegetable, really. So like leafy greens, kale, spinach, big giant raw salads, all this. I mean, there's all these plant toxins, there's pesticides, there's oxalates, there's phytic acid in nuts and things like this. Like I just really don't eat many vegetables whatsoever. I think they're one of the bigger problems in the American diet, honestly.
Well, yeah, let's dig into that. Let's actually, because that's really interesting, because I think I told you when we were speaking, you're the first person that's ever said to me that you do eat fruits, some fruits, but you don't like to eat many vegetables, but you do eat root vegetables, right? So you eat sweet potatoes and beets, and what are some of the vegetables that you do eat?
Yeah, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, beets are great. I really love carrots. And for me, it kind of stops there. I mean, like occasionally, I guess if my girlfriend made something, you know, something green, which she does occasionally, I would eat it, but there's no chance I'm eating raw leafy greens. It's just not going to happen. And like, you can look into this, like it doesn't take long on Googling to see where kale came from. Kale was expertly marketed to us. And if you actually stop and well, not stop, but if you go down that rabbit hole and dig into, they first started feeding kale to livestock. They were using it for like cows and pigs and things like this. And they were like being born with goiters. These are goitrogenic vegetables that are real problems. They disrupt thyroid function. So if we're looking at energy creation, the number one thing you need to manage is your thyroid health, right? So if you have something like kale, spinach, these leafy greens that have these oxalates and these things that are proven to be goitrogenic by nature that could potentially damage your thyroid, I mean, the risk versus reward there is just so lopsided to me. So at the very least, I tell people, like, even if you don't want to look at kale or spinach as poison, just don't eat them raw. Buy them organic so they don't have pesticides, rinse them really well with water, throw them in a steam basket, cook them well, then heat up a skillet with a little grass-fed butter and throw it in there and sizzle it around to eat it. Because we actually have clinical studies that show you can get rid of some of the goitrogenic properties of leafy greens by adding saturated fat to the cooking process. So there's a lot you can do to make these things safer, but they're just not a staple part of my diet. I don't consider them food. And the way I explain this to people is like, you know, I have an analogy where I say, you could hike through the forest for the rest of your life. You're never going to stumble upon a bagel tree.
Right.
Not a thing, right? But you're also never going to stumble upon a big giant field full of ready to eat heads of broccoli and kale. It's just not a thing that you're going to find. Like, it's a very unnatural thing that we've created and then convince people that it's really healthy. There's actually one woman, her name is escaping me right now, but one expert marketer that brought kale on the scene and did a great job with marketing efforts. Same thing with seed oils. You can go back and realize seed oils were an industrial waste product. They came into American society because of Procter and Gamble. They were making soap out of this seed oil because they wanted the bars of soap to float instead of sink. That's really where it came from. Then they were like, maybe we can sell this to people and convince them to eat it. So in 1948, they actually bribed, they gave the American Heart Association $1.7 million. And we're like, we want you to stand behind this cottonseed oil, basically, that we're creating. And then the American Heart Association went around telling everybody that animal fats will kill them and seed oils are healthier. And here we are. It's really crazy when you start to dig into this stuff.
It really is. It really is. So let me, I want to go back down the list. I know right now people are like, what? No vegetables? This is crazy. I haven't, I haven't heard anything like this. What am I supposed to eat? People are probably thinking all that kind of stuff. But let's start at like, okay, these are the worst. These are like the absolute worst. And we have seed oils, fried food, which are fried in seed oil at the top of that list. We got like processed sugar, right? Processed foods, processed sugar. What else would be up there? And I mean, gluten, right? Any kind of gluten product, I'd say would be up there. So those are like the worst of the worst. And then when you get down, like you're dealing with people who are very sensitive. I'm pretty sensitive to stuff. It's why I don't eat like a lot of beans and lectins and things of that nature, right? Again, there's been a lot of a lot of really bad stories, especially with people who are sensitive. Some people can tolerate certain things. Some people can eat kale or spinach and beans. And in fact, many vegans eat that every single day, right? And some people tolerate it well, and some people really do really bad with it. But it kind of like, as you go down the line, people like us, we get kind of pickier about what we want to put in our body. And so just to kind of wrap up the vegetable part of why you don't eat raw leafy greens like spinach and kale. And then I would love to go into like what you do eat on a daily basis and what you consider to be real superfoods. But why is it, again, for the lay person who's like, why shouldn't I eat spinach or kale? What's the reason there?
Yeah, the biggest thing to look into would be what's considered plant toxins. These are defense mechanisms within the plant, right? So when I say something that's like goitrogenic, for instance, this would be some kind of chemical molecule within that plant that is attacking thyroid function. And the best example of this is if you were to look at kale or spinach, they're high in something called oxalates. So again, when I said like our body can't take a credit card and convert that into energy, you'll often see vegans and such, they'll say like, oh, spinach is really high in calcium. The problem with that is spinach is also high in oxalates. And these little plant toxins bind to that calcium and prevent your body from absorbing it properly. So you might digest 5% of the calcium that's actually contained within spinach. The nutrition facts will say, look at all this calcium, but you're not going to get all that calcium because of these plant toxins are also called anti-nutrients. So they contain anti-nutrients that bind to these different vitamins and minerals in your body and prevent you from absorbing them. And also the most common form of kidney stones, let's say, like the stones that people get, are literally calcium oxalates. So you start to look at this, you'll find people with really, really high leafy green vegetable intake, and they have stones, and they're like, how did this happen? And they can't figure it out because they thought they were eating so healthy. So that would be the biggest thing. I would look into lectins, oxalates, phytic acid. And again, some of the most problematic ones you've already named are the breads, grains, those kinds of things. Legumes, I stay away from legumes for sure. Most raw nuts are really high in phytic acid. So looking up like phytic acid, lectins, oxalates, these different plant toxins, and then considering things that are heavily sprayed, right? Like a lot of people are eating pea protein right now, like vegan protein powders. Peas are one of the most heavily sprayed crops in all of monocropping. So these things are getting doused in glyphosate, and then you're grinding it up and drinking it as a protein powder, like concentrated, because the amount of peas that you would have to eat to get the same amount of protein you're getting in a pea protein powder. So now you have like this ultra concentrated pea protein. And I totally understand that this feels frustrating. Like we really do live in a society right now where most of the food system is poisoning us most of the time. The average American right now unknowingly consumes 5 to 10 tablespoons of seed oils every single day, because every restaurant in America cooks with them. And if you go through, anyone listening to this right now, like go through your house and just start looking at ingredients lists, you will be baffled where you find sunflower oil, soybean oil, canola oil, peanut oil. Like my girlfriend once found canola oil in ground chicken from Trader Joe's. It's on the ingredient list.
Literally, like my wife bought olives or something from like Whole Foods, and there was like literally canola oil. Like, I'm like, why would you put canola oil with this olive? Like salad dressings, right? Most salad dressings have these seed oils in them. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. So ultimately, I mean, we covered the biggest ones, I think, like, and then there's like nightshades, which are technically fruits. These are like peppers and things like that people tend to struggle with.
Tomatoes, peppers, right? Red peppers. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And again, you have a situation where like, I'm not saying if I get on the internet and I say, kale's not good for you and spinach is not good for you and peppers and tomatoes aren't good for you, and you're eating those things every day and you're absolutely thriving, continue to eat them. Do not worry about my opinion here. That's okay. But like you said, you're particularly sensitive. I'm quite sensitive. I work specifically with people who have autoimmune conditions that they can't figure out. So I'm on both ends of the spectrum. I'm either working with like professional MMA fighters that are weight cutting for athletic performance, or I'm with, obese individuals or non-obese individuals that are suffering with serious autoimmune conditions that they can't figure out. And all of the mainstream is telling them that they're crazy, that they're imagining it, or they just need to keep counting calories or whatever. And then I come along and I'm like, why don't we try removing kale from your diet and removing those raw tomatoes? And also your salad dressing is full of seed oils, but you're eating a 2-pound salad every day because you think you're being healthy. And then their health rapidly starts to get better. And they have this kind of like light bulb moment of like, what the hell just happened? It's really a matter of like being your own detective here. I can tell you all day which foods I think are the biggest offenders. And if you remove those for some period of time, you probably will have benefit. And then the other thing that I try to do, the opposite end of this, is my whole goal, something that I'm trying to do here is hyperload nutrients, right? Technically micronutrients. So when I say food is only good for you, eat lots and lots of real food, Every client that ever comes to me, I end up making them eat more food ultimately. And they're shocked by it because then they lose 30 pounds in 30 days and they're like, what just happened, right? But I'm hyper loading as many nutrients as possible. So I have an approved foods list with Clovis. Anyone that works with me gets this approved foods list. And I separate it out. I think these are all the best foods that you can eat, these organic fruits, and then page 1 of approved foods list is super proteins. These are the most, gram for gram, the most micronutrient dense foods on planet Earth. These are things like beef liver, oysters, mussels, shellfish, wild caught fish, red meat like steak. Then you have poultry, turkey, wild game, all these kinds of things. So I have, or bone broth, right? Collagen protein. We actually get a ton of, this is where you get into amino acids, right? People get a ton of methionine in their diet because they're only eating muscle meats, and they don't get any glycine, which is one of the most important amino acids for human health. Exists heavily in things like bone broth that's very high in collagen protein, right? These super proteins, I try to make the majority of my clients' diet come from these super proteins. I'm hyperloading especially all those B vitamins, which are critically important for the cells to be able to generate energy. So all the people that have been chronically dieting for 30 years, they have more micronutrients deficiencies than you can count, right? So I have to take a period of time, usually 30 to 90 days, where I'm hyperloading nutrients. Most of their diet is coming from these super proteins, the most nutrient dense foods on planet Earth. And then their energy, these like energy macros, carbohydrates and fats and such, are coming from different foods. Like we'll use, grass-fed butter, coconut oil, and then most of their energy is coming from things like organic fruit, raw honey. And this is where you get into the sugar situation. So like, again, this is where people get dogmatic about science and they don't dig into how these studies were actually done. So we have all these science, Dr. Lustig and all these guys that came out that were just like saying that sugar is evil and they call it the white devil and all this stuff, right? Where ultimately all of the studies that have been done showing harm from sugar, one, there are virtually zero studies that prove that actual sugar itself causes problems in the human body. What they'll do is they'll take these isolated versions of sugar. So they'll run rodent models or whatever on fructose. They will isolate fructose completely by itself and then give these rodents an amount of fructose that would be like us drinking 5 liters of pure fructose water a day and seeing what happened to our health. It's an astronomical amount of fructose that we could never really get. And they're isolating fructose. Fructose exists virtually nowhere in nature without glucose attached to it. So even if you look at fruit, which fructose is fruit sugar, right? Most fruit, if you average it out across all versions of fruit and different types, it sits right around 50-50 glucose and fructose. It's 2 different types of sugar together, 2 different types of carbohydrates, and then all the micronutrients that come along with it, that actually the micronutrients contained within the fruit itself helps your body digest the fruit you're eating. So again, this is like food in nature is information for the body. It's like your body reading blueprints on how to create proteins, tissues, and cells, right? So we're getting information from the food that we eat. Of course, if a scientist isolates fructose all by itself and then loads a rat full of it and says, look, this rat didn't do very well, then all of a sudden we all think that like natural sugar is bad for us. But you take something like raw honey. Raw honey has even been tested for rapid wound healing. Like you can put raw honey on a cut and it will heal faster. There's crazy studies around raw honey. It's good for dental health. Like it helps with bacteria in the mouth. Normal sugar can help promote cavities, whereas honey tends to have the opposite effect. Honey works really well in diabetics. It actually helps them manage blood glucose. Like this amazing little alien honey from the bees, right, works completely differently in the body than virtually any other form of sugar. So we now, thanks to the keto movement, we really have this push that like sugar is evil. And just for anybody listening to this, I did keto for years. I went over a year eating nothing but, and so I went from keto into carnivore. I got to be good buddies with Paul Saladino. He's a great guy and I love him. He's a good dude. But I ended up eating nothing but red meat, water, salt, and black coffee for over a year while I was also powerlifting, and I completely destroyed my health. I tanked my testosterone, then I had to go on this testosterone journey and introduce carbs back into my diet and all this stuff. So I'm not like poo-pooing anything that I haven't experienced myself. And this is something I do with my clients. Like, unless you're a woman and you're going to do like hormone supplementation for estrogen or something like that, anything that I ask you to do as my client, I have already done myself, and I just live by that.
Yeah. So you've done the carnivore. You didn't like that because there was a lack of carbs, and that wasn't good for your hormones. Right now, so you're trying to now. What I also think you weren't a huge fan of fasting, right? Or intermittent fasting. You're not really a huge fan because again, then it just makes it. Which I feel the same way, right? Like I'm trying to hit a certain, I'm trying to get at least like I weigh about 183 pounds. And I'm like, sometimes if I intermittent fast and I'm only eating 2 meals a day, even if each of those meals are 40 grams of protein, it's only 80 grams of protein and I weigh 183 pounds, right? So it's like, how do I get in enough protein? Like I'm not just going to like stuff myself eating the whole time, for 8 hours straight. So yeah, talk a little bit about, your ideas on fasting and about, how, why it's good for people to eat more. And then I assume also when people get that nourishment, now they can actually lift weights in a healthy way, which will increase the positive cycle of the metabolic rate, right? When they're able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. One of the fastest ways to increase resting metabolic rate is to increase skeletal muscle mass. So we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, is like, I'm 5'9", I weigh like 173 pounds right now, and I'm mostly muscle. So when I go get my resting metabolic rate test, I come back 20% higher than I should for my age, height, and weight, because I carry all this muscle, and muscle is metabolically expensive. It requires a lot of energy to keep these muscles working all the time, right? So that is one of the fastest ways, which brings us to fasting, intermittent fasting. So again, we've already covered, like, I think the biggest problem is most people are dramatically under eating micronutrients. So if we take people that are already under eating, and like you said, we shorten their feeding window, now you're in a situation where, like, let's say someone should be eating 2,800 calories a day and they're eating 1,600 calories a day. And then we say, well, why don't you try fasting 16 hours a day? Now you have an 8-hour eating window. Well, they're used to eating 1,600 calories in a 12-hour feeding window. And now we try to compress that to 8 hours. They might eat 1,200 calories and just completely destroy their health. So one, I think intermittent fasting is leading to a lot of under eating. And then the problem with that is then you have people who start combining these modalities where they say, well, I'm fasted, I'm not supposed to eat for another 4 hours, but I really want to get a workout in. So let me go to the gym, and now I'm going to do some cardio, or I'm going to lift weights. I'm going to tear up muscle fibers that I then cannot repair because I don't have substrate coming in to repair these tissues. And you just end up in a super damaged state. And the thing that I'll touch on with keto and intermittent fasting is that ultimately keto is mimicking a fasting state. That's really physiologically what it does. So I want people to really think about stress. The first thing I try to manage with my clients is their stress. We go through their, do you like your job? What is your romantic relationship like? How many hours are you sleeping? Are you watching TV at night? All these things, because it's really all about stress. Well, even the top, you can go to, Dom D'Agostino, or like the top keto expert in the world, and he will tell you ketosis is an inherently stressed state. So for keto to happen in the body, the catecholamines have to spike. These are like your stress hormones, namely being cortisol. Your cortisol has to go up for you to get into a state of ketosis where you can start converting your own stored body fat into ketones. This is an inherently stressed state. The same thing happens with fasting, right? So this is where when people start intermittent fasting or dipping into the state of ketosis, or they try keto and they dip into the state of ketosis, and the first few months, I mean, we all know entrepreneurs, me included, right? Our whole crew is entrepreneurs. And they're like, man, I switched to keto and I could work like crazy. My cognitive function just went through the roof, and I had all this energy, and I felt like I had to sleep less and all this stuff. Like in the beginning, it feels amazing. And this is literally, there's a term for it called the catecholamine honeymoon, which is like the first 1 to 3 months where you shift into ketosis, you're pumping cortisol, you're pumping adrenaline and all these stress hormones. You feel amazing because your body is literally saying, yo, you need to pay close attention and you need to go get food. Like we're having a problem. We are slipping into a low energy state, and it makes you feel more alert, right? So this is basically what fasting and keto are both doing, but it's almost like the body begging for energy. So you'll have people that try fasting or intermittent fasting. Now, especially if you have 200 pounds of excess body fat to lose and you start 16-8 intermittent fasting, you're going to drop some body weight really, really quick. That's going to convince you that this is really, really good for you. So again, if someone comes to me 300 pounds and diabetic, we're going to taper their carbohydrate intake. We might do something like intermittent fasting or prolonged fasting or something like that. There are things that we're going to do to help that person shift out of that state where they're maybe insulin resistant or have a lot of metabolic dysfunction going on. But I'm talking about long-term, and optimal health strategy cannot be an inherent state of stress. Like you can't just run around with your cortisol spiked all the time. We know directly if you have chronically elevated cortisol levels leads to chronically suppressed testosterone in men, right? So we have all these problems where like these things have really been sold to us as kind of like the holy grail. And again, just for listeners, like I did a 5-day fast, no food, no water. So I've fasted like crazy, right? Literally no food, no water. People are, you're going to die. I was like, no, I'm not going to die. Like, it's not a big deal, right? So I've tried these things extensively. And the other thing I'll say just to finish this intermittent fasting is I will say men seem to be able to handle intermittent fasting better than women. And
For
this is
sure.
the hormonal implications. Women's hormones are up and down in a matter of days, where men were like pretty consistent all the time. And women are also the most prone, because they get so much scrutiny their entire lives for their body image. They're also the most prone to under eating. So I really see, for women, I just see intermittent fasting goes off the rails virtually every time I've seen women try it.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting, man. And this, I kind of consider this conversation a really one of the more advanced conversations that we had, which I really enjoy. I really appreciate, because it's the same thing. Like, I've gone through all these different things, and like, yeah, keto is amazing, especially if you've been eating like bread and like stuff like that, right? You've been eating bread, you have a sandwich for lunch every day. All of a sudden you go keto, you ditch the bread, you ditch the gluten, you ditch, some other processed foods, and all of a sudden, like, you feel amazing. And that is a great first step for many people, right? But
Yeah,
then
yeah.
I've gone through this as well, where I'm now like having to introduce more carbs back, right? So like recently, and it's interesting because like there's these kind of these waves as well in the nutrition world, right? It's like a few years ago, keto was the huge craze, and now it's like you're hearing more and more people talk about like, yeah, like I'm not eating like a high carb diet. Like, I'm still probably, 100 grams of carbs or less every day, but I'm not like trying to be under 50 grams of carbs or under 30 gram, like the strict keto, diet is, right? And I just feel better, especially on days where I'm lifting weights, to get those little bit of extra carbs. And so it's a really high level conversation, because people have to figure out what works for them, right? So like, first of all, if you're whatever, vegan, keto, whatever you are right now, and you feel amazing, great. Like, keep doing that. Like you said before, like, this is not like a one size fits all. And this is another theme on our podcast that, with a lot of the guests that I've had, is like, people are now more realizing, I'm as well more realizing, because I used to be the same way. I'm like, oh, like, everyone should just be paleo. Like, why would anyone eat sugars or grains or whatever? Like, this is the answer. And like, I still, like, in a way, still kind of like feel like that's step one. But, again, it's like, hey, some people do great with this, some people do great with that. Like, it's not a one size fits all. But if you're eating healthy foods, and then you can kind of play with it a little and see what works for you, I think it's really important what you're talking about here, because people hear something like intermittent fasting and they're like, I have to do it. Like, I started doing it, and I'm like, actually, I'm just kind of hangry, and like, like, don't feel good. And like, I don't want to do a hard, workout on fasted, and
Yeah.
this kind of sucks. Right. And so like, I found like, hey, like, I don't eat a huge breakfast, but like, getting a little bit of protein and fats in with my morning coffee, now I feel amazing. And then I can go to the workout, come back, have my great protein shake, eat some eggs and some other things later on, have some meat, have some more protein, meat, fish or chicken or whatever for dinner. And now I feel amazing,
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that too. Like, if I had to choose something, if I just like summed up my nutrition philosophy, I'd be like, look, if you want this to be as simple as possible, look up the paleo diet, eat
Mhm.
specifically according to the paleo diet, and eat whenever you're hungry,
Yeah.
and eat until you're full. Like, it really is ultimately that simple. And I always want people to understand, this is a processed food environment problem. This
Mhm.
is a poison problem. The
Yeah.
obesity epidemic, the chronic disease epidemic, is a poison food problem. Like, that we put food and we put poison in the same category. Something I was chatting with you about earlier is that there's this amazing, it's called the Yearbook of Agriculture from 1939. And they were talking about food intake way back then, 1939, of like average New Yorkers. An average sedentary man weighed about 154 pounds and ate over 4,400 calories a day.
Wow.
And
Yep.
obesity was virtually unheard of, like near completely unheard of, right? There's no
Right.
obesity. Now we have people like, I have people come to me regularly that are on 1,200 calorie a day diets, and they have 100 excess pounds of body fat to lose. And we still are somehow convinced that eating less food is the thing. So that's all, the only message I'm trying to put out here is like, don't restrict food, restrict poison.
Right. Right.
Eat a lot of food because it's really good for you and you need it to survive. It's that
Exactly. And you mentioned to me one time before also about how your like hormones crashed, right? Like, when you
Yeah,
didn't eat enough calories, right?
yeah,
And so that's why the whole, there's so many flaws in the calories in versus calories out, movement. But one of them is like, okay, like, yeah, so you're drinking Coke Zero all day, like, don't you think, like, and you're wondering why your testosterone is so low, right? And now you're not able to build as much muscle. You don't feel as good mentally or physically, right? And so it's like, it's not just calories, not every calorie is the same. And it's not just calories in versus calories out, right? In fact, I think the meat industry back in the day, they found out that if they could, shoot up cows with antibiotics, that they would gain 30% more weight with no additional calories, right? So that should kind of tell people there, like, you can gain weight without eating more calories than just the whole calories in versus calories out. And so I really like this about getting your system on track, right? So you are actually teaching people the opposite. You're like, hey, refuel with real food, not poison, keep out the poison. And now your body will have the nutrients it needs to feed the engine and work the right way. I love it.
Exactly that. Yeah. It's like currency, right? It's energy flux. And it really is. So all of the things that we see, the calories in, calories out model, this idea of energy balance, this is completely dependent for that to be true, right? I'm not saying I don't believe in thermodynamics, right? They always use this thermodynamic argument. It's like, no, if you take in food, it's got to be burned, or it has to be stored, or it has to be excreted, which, by the way, we can sometimes lose as much as 30% of a meal just to digestion and it being excreted, even things that we want to digest. So again, like if your stomach acid and your bile is not right, your gut health is not right, you're not going to digest the food you're eating, and you're going to poop it out and it's going to be gone. Now you don't have the calories problem because you're not absorbing those calories, right? So the idea for them to just say, well, if you eat 1,000 calories and burn 1,000 calories, like, what? You have to be relying on a perfectly fine-tuned, 100% perfect health metabolism for that to be the truth.
Right.
And what we know by even mainstream studies is it's 88% of adults right now have at least one biomarker showing metabolic dysfunction. The entire system gets thrown off. Again, like if your spark plugs don't work correctly, your car is not going to create energy. It can't burn the fuel that you're putting into it, right?
Yep.
So the whole calories in, calories out model, the reason it drives me crazy is you are like relying on the fact that the metabolism has to be working perfectly for that calculation to work out. Most people don't have perfect machinery.
This is fascinating stuff, man. I know we got to wrap up in a minute. I did want to circle back real quick. Like, the fruits are, you do fruits, you do all fruits, or is there some fruits that you avoid? Well, I guess tomatoes, like nightshade fruits, you would avoid.
Yeah. What we would think of as like traditional fruits, yeah, I eat them. And the other thing too is, like, a lot of people ask me, like, what about like in season? Are you eating local fruits and all these things? The answer is no. I actually prefer citrus fruits. Like, I love pineapples, I love watermelon, I love oranges, are amazing. I drink orange juice, I like coconut water. Like, these are all really good sources of carbohydrates that are really micronutrient rich. That too, you can go down a rabbit hole of
fresh squeezed orange juice, not orange juice from the supermarket, not Tropicana, I assume.
Yeah,
right?
You got to be really careful about juice from concentrate and stuff. Like, if you have a Whole Foods in your area, you can get really, like, Matt's is like an organic brand, MATT, like that's a good organic brand of orange juice. There are some good brands and stuff that you can get for orange juice. And oranges are an amazing superfood. There's a ton. There's even like anti-cancer properties of oranges. If you dig in.
But the difference, you're saying the difference is they don't have the defense mechanism, the oxalates that the vegetables have that you're trying to avoid.
100%. Yeah. And if you look at the evolution of plants, right, like the stems and seeds and all those things, they don't want to be eaten because that actually messes with the reproduction of the plant. Whereas fruits kind of want to be eaten, because if predators are eating fruits, especially fruits with seeds, what ends up happening is they eat these fruits, they carry those seeds, they poop them out. This is why humans have probably noticed when you eat seeds, they usually come out whole, right? They're being put somewhere else to be planted in the ground and populated. This is literally how fruits reproduce. They're kind of relying on the predator to eat them and carry them around so they can populate in other areas, right? So there's big juicy fruits, the color, like, think about ancestrally, you're walking through the woods and you see a big blue fat blueberry, right? And it's like, it catches your eye. It's almost like they're begging to be eaten, right?
Yeah.
And they're really, really good sources of energy. And the number one, and I know I was keto for a long time, I get it, I was in this camp for a long time, but the number one source of energy for the body is glucose for humans, ultimately.
Interesting. Really interesting. Man, wow, this was good stuff. This was good stuff. To where can people, I know you're like, you've gone viral on TikTok recently. I've seen some of your videos that you put there and some other places. I don't want to, I don't go down the TikTok rabbit hole, but I wanted to watch your videos for sure. And they were really good, really informative. Where can people follow you, learn more? I know, you got a pretty big following on social these days.
Yeah. So all social media is at the Clovis Culture. So again, I named the company Clovis, CLOVIS, and at the Clovis Culture is the Instagram handle, TikTok, all those things. And like, if you go to my TikTok, you'll see, like, I just want this to be fun. I want people to have fun getting healthy. I'm not interested in the debates and the back and forth and the hate that comes with nutrition. It's like, if you want to come have a good time and learn how to get healthy, I'm your guy for sure. It's a lot of fun. So you can check me out at the Clovis Culture. And I did just launch an online course called the Clovis Custom Metabolism Reset. And this is 21 daily video lessons with like actual visuals of the metabolic furnace analogy and all those things. I make it very, very simple with a lot of visuals that help you understand this entire concept of creating more energy in the body and food versus poison. And that's just, my website is I Am Clovis. And you can go to iamclovis.com/metabolism, and you can find that course and learn all about it.
Awesome. Amazing. And your protein powder as well, your paleo protein powder, people can get that on the website as well?
Yep, iamclovis.com has the daily superfood powder. I also have the hydration drink mix, which is an electrolyte supplement. We have vitamin D3, digestive enzymes. We got some gut health products, all sorts of stuff. There's like 10 different SKUs on there now that you can pick up.
Awesome, man. Well, this was really awesome. I know some people are going to be like, just have their head spinning right now after hearing this kind of stuff for the first time. But it's great information to know and to think about, and to, if maybe you were eating salads every day, but your gut isn't feeling good, maybe now you know why, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, the more information we have, I love, and you're walking the walk too. First of all, you have like a following of people who are like really, really into you because you've really helped them deal with something that they couldn't deal with in any other way, right? So you're walking the walk, you're helping lots of people, and the ideas that you're sharing are not just the same old ideas that everyone's talking about. You're living it, you're testing it, you're doing stuff. And I've spoken to you on a deeper personal level as well. So I know you're just an amazing man from that perspective as well, man. So just want to really thank you for joining us here today and sharing your wisdom with everyone.
Yeah, man, right back at you. Like, the more I get to know you, the more I like you. You're an amazing human. I really appreciate you having me. And thank you for saying the kind things about the community too. That's something I want to stress is like, come check out the Clovis community. And it's not really about me, what I've done, whatever. Like, I like to share results with people. And like you said, the results that we get in Clovis are so significant that there are people walking around with Clovis tattoos.
Nice.
That's all you need to know about the brand.
That's a great sign, man. Amazing, man. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. And just a reminder, if you haven't yet tried any of our Peak Performance products, you get 20% off your first order. We have one of the largest selection of USDA certified organic superfood powders, as well as very high quality supplements. And you get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com. That's www.buypeakperformance.com.